Welcome back to my channel. Something faintly metallic and unsettling. Strange charts of the zodiac cover through walls. A human skull sits on a desk next to a bubbling glass, and a learned man in a dark robe is peering intently into a vial of urine, as if it holds all the secrets of the universe. This was Thorold of the Renaissance physician, a place where science, magic, and sheer guesswork collided. The story of this medicine may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your ancestors considered things like powdered mummies and pigeon dung to be cutting-edge pharmaceuticals. So before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. I'd love to see you comment with where and when you started watching the video, or maybe just give a compliment if you'll feel so inclined. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible, turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. Your journey begins with a familiar human misery. You wake up one morning feeling awful. Your head aches, your skin is hot and clammy, and a fever is taking hold. Fearing for your health, you seek out the services of a learned physician, a man who has studied at a great university. You expect him to ask about your specific symptoms, to perhaps examine you. Instead, after a brief look, he begins to ask you a series of strange questions. What is your general temperament? Are you usually cheerful or prone to anger? What season is it? And what did you have for dinner last night? To understand why he cares more about your personality and your pulse, you must first understand the grand, ancient, and almost entirely wrong theory that governed all of his medical thinking. This is the mainstream historical fact that is the key to this entire world. The theory of the four humours. The physician explains that this theory, handed down from the great doctors of ancient Greece like Hippocrates and Galenus, the foundation of all medicine. The universe, he tells you, is composed of four essential elements: earth, air, fire, and water. The human body, being a small reflection of the universe, a microcosm, is therefore also composed of four corresponding fluids or humours. He explains these four humours to you. First, there is blood, which corresponds to the element of air. Its qualities are hot and moist. It is associated with springtime and with a sanguine or cheerful and optimistic temperament. Second, there is phlegm, which corresponds to water. Its qualities are cold and moist. It is associated with winter and a phlegmatic, top, calm, and unemotional personality. Third, there is yellow bile or colic corresponding to fire. Its qualities are hot and dry. It is associated with summer and a or irritable and angry temperament. And finally, there is black bile or melancholy corresponding to earth. Its qualities are cold and dry. It is linked to autumn and a melancholic or sad and depressive personality. This quirky and complex system of correspondences was not a fringe belief. It was the absolute core of all medical diagnosis. It was a system where being chronically cheerful was literally a pre-existing medical condition. Your health, the doctor continues, depends on these four humours being in perfect balance. Every illness, from a common cold to the plague itself, is simply the result of an imbalance. Too much or too little of one of these vital fluids. He looks at you, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Your fever is a sign of excess heat. The fact that you're sweating means there is also excess moisture. Heat and moisture are the qualities of blood. Therefore, his diagnosis is simple and elegant. You have an excess of blood in your system. Your sanguine humor is out of balance. You can see now how the system, as flawed as its premises were, provided a complete and rational framework. For the Renaissance doctor, this is where historians of science debate: was humoral theory a complete impediment to medical progress, or did it in its own way provide a logical and systematic method for making sense of the chaos of human illness? From your perspective, sitting here with a fever, it feels both logical and terrifying. Humoral theory was the original everything is connected worldview. Your cheerful personality, the springtime weather, and the roast chicken you ate for dinner were all part of a grand fluid-based conspiracy to make you sick. And if the diagnosis flows from the theory, so too does the treatment. Since you have too much of a hot and moist humor, blood, the cure is obvious. You must be made colder and drier. The doctor might first prescribe a change in diet, telling you to avoid hot foods like red meat and wine, and instead consume cold foods like fish, fruits, and cucumbers. But diet is a slow method. The most direct and efficient way to treat an excess of a human is to remove it from the body. The doctor dips his quill in ink and writes you a prescription. The answer to his diagnosis, the cure for your fever. Isto, get rid of the surplus blood. The answer to almost every medical problem you're beginning to suspect is to somehow get some of that humor out of you. You leave the physician's study, his diagnosis of too much blood echoing in your mind. You now understand the fundamental theory that governed every single medical decision of the age. But a theory is not a cure. You still need the treatment. Where do you go to have this dangerous fluid removed, or to acquire the strange concoctions of cold herbs the doctor also prescribed? Your next stop is not a clean modern pharmacy with neatly labeled bottles. You're heading for the dark, cluttered, and magical workshop where all the weird and disgusting medicine of the Renaissance was born. The apothecary shop. You leave the physician's study with his diagnosis of an excessive blood weighing on your mind. You clutch the prescription in your hand, list of herbs to counteract your body's heat, and most importantly, the instruction for a phlebotomy. Your first stop on this strange medicology is the apothecary shop, the place where the raw ingredients of Renaissance medicine are sourced, prepared, and sold from the street. You can identify it by the painted sign of a mortar and pestle hanging above the door. Even before you enter, a complex and powerful aroma wafts out to meet you, an invisible wall of smells, both enticing and strange. You push open the door and step inside. The scent becomes an overwhelming multi-layered experience. You can pick out the sweet, comforting notes of cinnamon and cloves, the sharp, clean scent of lavender and rosemary, and the deep, earthy smell of dried roots like licorice and mandrake. But underneath it all, there are other less familiar, the faint mineral tempt of ground-up gemstones, the musky scent of amalgams, and a dusty ancient smell that seems to rise from the very floorboards. Your eyes adjust to the dim light. The shop is a cavern of mysterious treasures. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with wooden shelves, and every shelf is crammed with hundreds of ceramic jars. Many are beautifully decorated tin-glazed earthenware pots called alberli, their surfaces painted with intricate blue and yellow designs and their contents labeled in elegant Latin script. From the rafters above you hang huge bunches of dried herbs, desiccated seed pods, and alarmingly a variety of dried animal parts, a string of frogs, the skin of a snake, and what looks like the preserved body of a small alligator or crocodile. This is where you encounter a quirky and revealing tidbit about the apothecary's trade suspended in a place of honor as a long, spiraling ivory-white tusk. The apothecary, you learn, presents this as the horn of a unicorn, an object believed to be a universal antidote to toll poisons. In reality, it is the tusk of a narwhal brought at great expense from the icy seas of the north. The crocodile and the unicorn horn are not just decorations, they're a form of marketing. They are meant to inspire awe in the customers, to serve as proof that the apothecary is a worldly man with access to rare, powerful, and exotic substances from the farthest corners of the earth. From a back room filled with the clinking of and the rhythmic grinding of a mortar and pestle, the apothecary himself emerges. He's not a university-trained physician in a scholar's robe, but a master craftsman in a leather apron, a member of a powerful guild like the grocers or the spice merchants. This is the mainstream distinction between the two professions. The physician diagnosed your humoral imbalance, but the apothecary was the skilled artisan who knew how to compound the physical remedy. Historians, however, still debate the true role of the apothecary. Was he simply a tradesman following a doctor's orders, or was he, for the vast majority of the population who couldn't afford a physician's fees, the primary healthcare provider? The evidence suggests that for many, the apothecary was their first, last, and only stop. They would come in, describe their cough or their fever, and the apothecary would listen, nod, and mix up a remedy on the spot, combining his extensive knowledge of herbalism with the foundational principles of humoral theory. You watch as he prepares a prescription for another customer. He consults a large leather-bound book, then begins to take small amounts from dozens of different jars. He is mixing a batch of thick, the most famous and complex cure-all of the ancient and Renaissance world. It was a thick honey-based elixir that could contain more than 60 different ingredients, including opium, viper's flesh, cinnamon, and a host of other rare spices and herbs. It was fabulously expansive and was believed to be effective against everything from poison to the plague itself. It was the ultimate multivitamin if your vitamins included narcotics and snake meat. You look closer at the Latin labels on the hundreds of jars that surround you. You see familiar comforting names like rosefir, rose petals, or mint for mint. But then your eyes fall upon other jars and a chill runs down your spine. One is labeled cranium humanum, powdered human skull. Another mumia, which you learn contains ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. A third contains oculi, or crab size, which were actually the smoothest sea-white stomach stones of crayfish. You realize this is not merely a pharmacy. It is a cabinet of curiosities, a hardware store of magical ingredients, and a carol house of grisly remedies. It was like a health food store where half the ingredients were toxic and the other half were already dead. Finally, the apothecary turns to you. He takes your physician's note and prepares a simple mixture of cooling herbs for your fever. He gives you instructions on what to eat and drink, but he shakes his head at the last item on the list. The phlebotomy, he says, his voice dry as the herbs he grinds. For that, you must go elsewhere. He explains that his trade is in the compounding of substances, not in the letting of blood. For that, you need to see a different kind of specialist entirely, a man whose skills are more manual. Your journey into the weird world of Renaissance medicine is about to take another turn to a man who might offer you a shave and a haircut before he performs the most common surgical procedure of the age. You leave the apothecary shop clutching your small bag of cooling herbs and walk down the street. The final part of your prescription still needs to be filled, and it is by far the most daunting. The physician diagnosed you with an excess of blood, and now that excess must be removed. You're heading for a phlebotomy, or as it is more commonly known, a bloodletting. You feel a knot of fear in your stomach, but you push it down. This is not some freeing experimental treatment. This is the single most common and trusted medical procedure of the age, the logical and necessary conclusion to your doctor's humble diagnosis. You arrive at the establishment of the man who will perform the deed. Before he begins, he does something you find both reassuring and deeply strange. He pulls out a leather-bound almanac and a complex chart depicting a human figure covered in the symbols of the zodiac. This is the Zodiac Man, and it's a crucial piece of quirky medical technology. Each sign of the zodiac was believed to govern a specific part of the body: Aries the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so on. The practitioner consults his chart, checking the current position of the moon. He nods, satisfied. The moon is not in Gemini, so it is a safe day to bleed you from the arm. To open a vein in a part of the body when the moon was in its corresponding sign was considered incredibly dangerous, a sure way to invite a disaster. It was a level of scientific caution that was both impressive and, given the nature of the procedure, spectacularly misdirected. With the stars and moon in alignment, the process can begin. This is the mainstream historical fact of Renaissance medicine. Bloodletting waste go to cure for nearly everything, from a simple fever like yours to head axis infections, apoplexy, and even mania. The answer is almost always let some blood. The practitioner sits you down on a stool. He takes your arm and ties a strip of leather tightly around your bicep, making the veins in your forearm stand out, blue and prominent. He has several tools for the job. He might choose a lancet, a small pointed steel blade, or he might use a flea, a tool with several small folding blades of different sizes used for opening veins of different calibers. He selects a vine and, with a swift, practiced motion, he makes a small, sharp cut. You flinch at the sting of the blade. Immediately your blood, dark and rich, begins to flow, and he catches it in a special pewter or brass bowl, often marked with lines on the inside to measure the amount by. You watch, mesmerized and horrified, as your own vital fluid fills the bowl. He will continue until he's removed what he deems to be the correct amount to restore your humoral balance, perhaps half a pint or even a full pint. Alternatively, he might use other methods. He could use cupping. A small glass cup would be heated with a flame and then placed on your skin. As the air inside the cup cooled, it would create a powerful vacuum, pulling the skin up into a tight red dome. This process, known as dry cupping, was believed to draw the bad humors to the surface. For wet cupping, the practitioner would then use his lancet to make a series of small cuts on the raised flesh, allowing the bad blood to be drawn out, or he could turn to nature's own little phlebotomists, leeches. He would take several of the slimy, wriggling creatures from a jar of water and apply them to your skin. You would feel a slight tickle and then nothing as they attach themselves and release their own natural anesthetic. You would then sit there as they slowly and steadily drain the blood from you, swelling into dark, bloated sacs before they finally drop off. However it is done, the result is the same. A significant amount of your blood is now outside of your, but he would begin to feel weak, lighted, and a cold sweat breaks out on your brow. This, far from being a sign of danger, was often interpreted as a positive outcome. The faintness was seen as proof that the excess heat of the sanguine humor was leaving your body, that your system was calming down and rebalancing itself. The procedure was considered a success if the patient nearly passed out. By that logic, nearly every procedure was a stunning success. And here lies a debate that continues among medical historians. Was bloodletting, based on its entirely flawed theory, uniformly harmful, or could it have had any accidental positive effects? Some speculate that for a patient with dangerously high blood pressure, a sudden bloodletting might have temporarily lowered it, providing some relief. But the overwhelming case is that for an already sick and weakened patient, losing a significant amount of blood, the very fluid that carries oxygen and fights infection, was almost certainly detrimental and in many cases fatal. Centuries later, the first president of the United States, George Washington, would be bled of a massive quantity of blood by his physicians in a short period of time for a throat infection, a treatment that almost certainly contributed to his death. The bleeding is finally finished. The practitioner bandages your arm tightly and gives you a drink of water. You feel weak, pale, and unsteady on your feet. But you're assured that you have been given the best possible care. You've been treated according to the highest scientific principles of the age. As you slowly recover your senses, you'll look at the man who so expertly opened your vein. He is wiping his lancet clean on a rag, ready for his next customer. And then you notice the other side of his shop. You see chairs, mirrors, razors, and scissors. You see wigs on stands, and you realize with a dawning sense of surreal horror that the medical specialist you have just entrusted with your life is the very same man you would come to for a shave and a haircut. You have just met the multi-talented and often profoundly dangerous figure of the barber surgeon. You sit on the stool in the barber surgeon shop, your head light from the bloodletting, trying to process the strange reality of your situation. The man who just expertly sliced into a vein is now casually stropping a razor, preparing to give another customer a shave. The air smells of soap and hair tonics layered over the faint metallic scent of blood. How? You wonder, did these two professions, the art of grooming and the grim craft of surgery, become so inextricably linked? The answer lies in the rigid class structure of the Renaissance world and the profound snobbery of the university-trained physician. This is the mainstream historical fact that separates their world from ours. Surgery was not considered a high-status medical specialty. It was a trade. The physician, remember, was a gentleman and a scholar. He worked with his intellect, reading the ancient texts of Galen and diagnosing the subtle imbalances of the four humors. He would never stoop to the messy manual labor of actually cutting into a human body. That was bloody hands-on work fit only for a craftsman, and who in a medieval or Renaissance town already had a shop, a steady hand, and an array of very sharp steel tools. The barber. It was a strangely logical, if unsettling, partnership. The barber was already trusted to take a razor to a man's throat for a shave. From there, it was a short leap to taking a lancet to his arm for bloodletting or a pair of pliers to his smith to pull a rotten tooth. The two professions merged, and for centuries, the barber-surgeon was a pillar of every community. It makes a certain kind of grim sense. The skill set required for giving you a little off the top isn't all that different from what's needed for, well, a little off the top. You look outside his shop and you see the quirky and iconic symbol of his trade, the barber pole. You had always seen it as a piece of festive decoration, but now you understand its true grisly meaning. The pole itself, who represents the staff that a patient would grip tightly to, make the veins in their arm bulge for the phlebotomy. The white of the spiraling stripe represents the clean linen bandages used to wrap the wound, and the red stripe that represents the blood that soaked those bandages after the procedure. The brass ball at the top is said to symbolize the basin that caught the blood. The pole was not a cheerful sign. It was a graphic menu of the services offered within. The scope of the barber-surgeon's practice was surprisingly broad. Bloodletting was his bread and butter, the most common procedure by far. He was also the town's only dentist, responsible for pulling aching teeth with a terrifying array of pliers and turnkey-like instruments. He would lance boils and abscesses, set broken bones with crude splints and stitch up minor wounds, and at the most extreme end of his practice, he performed amputations. This was a desperate last-ditch measure, usually reserved for or for a case of gangrene that threatened the patient's life. It was a brutal lightning gas procedure performed without anesthetic, and their chances of survival were slim. This of course leads to the question that historians still debate. Were these men dangerous to uneducated sawbones-and butchers, or were they highly skilled practical surgeons? The truth is that they were both. A poorly trained or clumsy barber surgeon with his unwashed hands and unsterilized tools was an agent of infection and death. But a master barber surgeon, a man who had gone through a long and rigorous apprenticeship under another master, could be a figure of immense practical skill. He might not be able to read Galen in the original Latin, but his hands-on daily experience with the reality of the human body often gave him a far better understanding of practical anatomy than the university physician who learned everything from ancient and often incorrect books. Choosing your barber surgeon was a terrifying lottery. You prayed you were getting the seasoned master craftsman, but you might be getting the clumsy apprentice on his first day of the tooth-pulling module. You pay the barber surgeon his fee for both the bloodletting and the medical advice. You have now been treated by the three main pillars of the Renaissance medical world: the physician who diagnosed, the apothecary who compounded, and the barber surgeon who performed the manual procedure. As you steady yourself and prepare toll of your head still swimming, your mind returns to the first man you saw, the learned physician in his study. You think of his strange diagnostic methods, his focus on the stars and the humors, and you remember seeing him hold a glass vial of urine up to the candlelight, peering at it with the intensity of a jeweler examining a precious gem. What on earth could he have learned from it? How could the contents of that vial tell him anything about the state of your blood, your liver, or your soul? Your journey into this weird world of medicine now takes you back to the physician's study to explore one of their most visually distinctive and deeply bizarre diagnostic arts of the age. You're about to be introduced to the intricate color-coded science of the urine wheel. Weak and dizzy from your bloodletting, you leave the barber surgeon shop. Your journey through the strange landscape of Renaissance Amazon has left you with more questions than answers. Your mind returns to the man who began this process, the learned physician. You recall how he peered so intently into that glass vial of urine, and you wonder what secrets he could possibly have hoped to find there. To understand, you must return to his study and witness one of the most central and bizarre diagnostic rituals of the age, the science of uroscopy. You're back in his dimly lit room. On his desk, next to the human skull in the bubbling, is a special flask made of clear glass. It is a matula, a vessel designated specifically for this purpose, with a rounded body and a long narrow neck. You have brought him a sample as instructed. He takes the matula and holds it up not to his nose but to the light of a candle, his expression one of deep scholarly concentration. He is not merely glancing at it. He's performing a medical examination that is as complex and codified as any modern lab test. This is the mainstream historical fact that often surprises us. Uroscopy was not folk magic or quackery. It was a highly developed and respected diagnostic art. the cornerstone of medieval and Renaissance medical practice. The physician was looking for 4 key properties: the urine's color, its consistency, its sediments, and even its smell and taste. To interpret what Hesses he turns to a magnificent and intricate chart hanging on the wall. Itis, a urine wheel. This beautiful hand-painted diagram shows at least 20 different shades of urine arranged in a circle like the spokes of a wheel. Each color has a specific name and corresponds to a particular state of the body's humors. A pale whitish color might indicate an excess of cold wet phlegm. A fiery reddish hue suggests an overabundance of hot dry yellow bile. A dark almost black color was considered the most dangerous of all, a sign of burnt melancholic black bile and a likely harbinger of death. It was like a paint color swatch you might find at a modern hardware store if the store specialized exclusively in shades of sickness and decay. But the doctor's analysis doesn't stop at the color. He gently swirls the contents of themotula, observing its consistency. Is it thin and watery or thick and syrupy like honey? He holds it still, watching for any particles or cloudiness to settle at the bottom. The metula itself was seen as a perfect microcosm of the human body. Sediment in the bottom of the flask related to ailments of the lower body. Cloudiness in the middle corresponded to the torso, and floating particles at the top related to the head. It was a complete full-body CT scan performed with a single glass flask and a whole lot of imagination. Now comes the part of the examination that required a truly dedicated physician with a strong stomach. This is the quirky and often disgusting tidbit of fluoroscopy. The doctor unstoppers the metula and takes a delicate professional sniff, checking for any foul odor that might indicate putrefaction within the body. And then for the final definitive test, he might dip the very tip of his finger into the liquid and touch it to his tongue. He's tasting it. Specifically, he's checking for sweetness. A distinctly sweet taste was a known, if poorly understood, sign of what we now call diabetes. Its old name, diabetes mellitus, literally means the honeyed or sweet siphon, a name derived directly from this ancient and stomach-turning diagnostic technique. It certainly gives a new and visceral meaning to the term lab work, and this is where historians and medical experts debate. Was uroscopy pure charlatanism, a theatrical ritual designed to impress a gullible patient? Or, despite its utterly flawed humoral foundation, did it represent a primitive form of non-invasive diagnostics? A skilled physician could have spotted genuine clinical signs: the dark urine of jaundice, the cloudiness of a urinary tract infection, the blood that indicates kidney problems, all would have been visible in the mula. The doctor's interpretation of these signs would have been wrong, but his observation was not entirely useless. He was seeing real symptoms, just filtering them through a completely imaginary theoretical lens. The physician now completes his examination. He nods gravely. The reddish tinge he has observed in your sample, he informs you, confirms his initial diagnosis. Your sanguine humor, your blood is indeed in a state of excess. The urine, which he believed was a distillate of the blood, has provided the scientific proof. You're struck by the elegance of thesicist, this self-confirming loop of theory and diagnosis. But as your mind wanders, you think back to the apothecary shop. You remember the strange, unsettling labels on his ceramic jars, ingredients far more bizarre than anything in the doctor's material. You recall the jar labeled cranium humanant, the unmarked mumia. Your journey into the weird medicine of the Renaissance is about to take a much darker turn, into the most gruesome and shocking corner of the pharmacist's dispensary. You're about to enter the grisly world of corpse medicine. Your mind recoils from the physician's study, pulling away from the strange science of the urine wheel. You're drawn back to the apothecary shop, to the memory of enigmatic jars lining the shelves. Your curiosity, now tinged with a creep dread, fixes on one particular label, written in elegant Latin script: cranium humanum, human skull, and next to it, the even more famous and prized ingredient, mumia. You imagine the apothecary taking one of these jars down from the shelf, removing heavy lid, and you brace yourself for what lies within. This is your entry into the deeply weird and grisly world of corpse medicine, and it is a mainstream historical fact that for centuries, remedies made from human body parts were not the secret spells of some dark sorcerer. They were a common, accepted, and often very expensive part of the official pharmacapa. At the top of this strange market was mumia, a dark, crumbly rainous powder made from the ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. It was imported at great cost from Thedums of the Nile Valley and was prescribed by the most learned physicians as a panacea, a cure-all for everything from a simple headache to internal bleeding and even the plague itself. The logic, as far as it went, was that the bumen and other exotic resins used by the ancient Egyptians in their embalming processes held powerful, almost magical preservative qualities. It was believed that vowed by ingesting these substances, some of that preservative power, the defiance of decay, could be transferred to your own ailing body. The demand for authentic Egyptian mummy was so great that it created a problem of supply. Wick. Make the veins in their arm bulge for the phlebotomy. The white of the spiraling stripe represents the clean linen bandages used to wrap the wound, and the red stripe that represents the blood that soaked those bandages after the procedure. The brass ball at the top is said to symbolize the basin that caught the blood. The pole was not a cheerful sign. It was a graphic menu of the services offered within. The scope of the barber surgeon's practice was surprisingly broad. Bloodletting was his bread and butter, the most common procedure by far. He was also the town's only dentist, responsible for pulling aching teeth with a terrifying array of pliers and turnkey-like instruments. He would lance boils and abscesses, set broken bones with crude splints and stitch up minor wounds, and at the most extreme end of his practice, he performed amputations. This was a desperate last-ditch measure, usually reserved for thieves or for a case of gangrene that threatened the patient's life. It was a brutal lightning gas procedure performed without anesthetic, and their chances of survival were slim. This of course leads to the question that historians still debate. Were these men dangerous to uneducated sawbones-and butchers, or were they highly skilled practical surgeons? The truth is that they were both. A poorly trained or clumsy barber surgeon with his unwashed hands and unsterilized tools was an agent of infection and death. But a master barber surgeon, a man who had gone through a long and rigorous apprenticeship under another master, could be a figure of immense practical skill. He might not be able to read Galen in the original Latin, but his hands-on daily experience with the reality of the human body often gave him a far better understanding of practical anatomy than the university physician who learned everything from ancient and often incorrect books. Choosing your barber surgeon was a terrifying lottery. You prayed you were getting the seasoned master craftsman, but you might be getting the clumsy apprentice on his first day of the tooth-pulling module. You pay the barber surgeon his fee for both the bloodletting and the medical advice. You have now been treated by the three main pillars of the Renaissance medical world: the physician who diagnosed, the apothecary who compounded, and the barber surgeon who performed the manual procedure. As you steady yourself and prepare to leave your head still swimming, your mind returns to the first man you saw, the learned physician in his study. You think of his strange diagnostic methods, his focus on the stars and the humors, and you remember seeing him hold a glass vial of urine up to the candlelight, peering at it with the intensity of a jeweler examining a precious gem. What on earth could he have learned from it? How could the contents of that vial tell him anything about the state of your blood, your liver, or your soul? Your journey into this weird world of medicine now takes you back to the physician's study to explore one of their most visually distinctive and deeply bizarre diagnostic arts of the age. You're about to be introduced to the intricate color-coded science of the urine wheel. Weak and dizzy from your bloodletting, you leave the barber surgeon shop. Your journey through the strange landscape of Renaissance Amazon has left you with more questions than answers. Your mind returns to the man who began this process, the learned physician. You recall how he peered so intently into that glass vial of urine, and you wonder what secrets he could possibly have hoped to find there. To understand, you must return to his study and witness one of the most central and bizarre diagnostic rituals of the age, the science of uroscopy. You're back in his dimly lit room. On his desk, next to the human skull in the bubbling, is a special flask made of clear glass. It is a matula, a vessel designated specifically for this purpose, with a rounded body and a long, narrow neck. You've brought him a sample as instructed. He takes the matula and holds it up not to his nose but to the light of a candle, his expression one of deep scholarly concentration. He is not merely glancing at it. He's performing a medical examination that is as complex and codified as any modern lab test. This is the mainstream historical fact that often surprises us. Uroscopy was not folk magic or quackery. It was a highly developed and respected diagnostic art. The cornerstone of medieval and Renaissance medical practice. The physician was looking for four key properties: the urine's color, its consistency, its sediments, and even its smell and taste. To interpret what he sees, he turns to a magnificent and intricate chart hanging on the wall. Itis, a urine wheel. This beautiful hand-painted diagram shows at least 20 different shades of urine arranged in a circle like the spokes of a wheel. Each color has a specific name and corresponds to a particular state of the body's humors. A pale whitish color might indicate an excess of cold wet phlegm. A fiery reddish hue suggests an overabundance of hot dry yellow bile. A dark, almost black color was considered the most dangerous of all, a sign of burnt melancholic black bile, and a likely harbinger of death. It was like a paint color swatch you might find at a modern hardware store if the store specialized exclusively in shades of sickness and decay. But the doctor's analysis doesn't stop at the color. He gently swirls the contents of the matula, observing its consistency. Is it thin and watery or thick and syrupy like honey? He holds it still, watching for any particles or cloudiness to settle at the bottom. The matula itself was seen as a perfect microcosm of the human body. Sediment in the bottom of the flask related to ailments of the lower body. Cloudiness in the middle corresponded to the torso, and floating particles at the top related to the head. It was a complete full-body CT scan performed with a single glass flask and a whole lot of imagination. Now comes the part of the examination that required a truly dedicated physician with a strong stomach. This is the quirky and often disgusting tidbit of uroscopy. The doctor unstoppers the matula and takes a delicate professional sniff. checking for any foul odor that might indicate putrefaction within the body. And then for the final definitive test, he might dip the very tip of his finger into the liquid and touch it to his tongue. He's tasting it. Specifically, he's checking for sweetness. A distinctly sweet taste was a known, if poorly understood, sign of what we now call diabetes. Its old name, diabetes mellitus, literally means the honeyed or sweet siphon, a name derived directly from this ancient and stomach-turning diagnostic technique. It certainly gives a new and visceral meaning to the term lab work, and this is where historians and medical experts debate. Was uroscopy pure charlatanism, a theatrical ritual designed to impress a gullible patient? Or, despite its utterly flawed humoral foundation, did it represent a primitive form of non-invasive diagnostics? A skilled physician could have spotted genuine clinical signs. The dark urine off jaundice, the cloudiness of a urinary tract infection, the blood that indicates kidney problems, all would have been visible in the moolah. The doctor's interpretation of these signs would have been wrong, but his observation was not entirely useless. He was seeing real symptoms, just filtering them through a completely imaginary theoretical lens. The physician now completes his examination. He nods gravely. The reddish tinge he has observed in your sample, he informs you, confirms his initial diagnosis. Your sanguine humor, your blood is indeed in a state of excess. The urine, which he believed was a distillate of the blood, has provided the scientific proof. You're struck by the elegance of thesicist, this self-confirming loop of theory and diagnosis. But as your mind wanders, you think back to the apothecary shop. You remember the strange, unsettling labels on his ceramic jars, ingredients far more bizarre than anything in the doctor's material. You recall the jar labeled cranium humanand, the unmarked mummy. Your journey into the weird medicine of the Renaissance is about to take a much darker turn, into the most gruesome and shocking corner of the pharmacist's dispensary. You're about to enter the grisly world of corpse medicine. Your mind recoils from the physician's study, pulling away from the strange science of the urine wheel. You're drawn back to the apothecary shop, to the memory of enigmatic jars lining the shelves. Your curiosity, now tinged with a creep dread, fixes on one particular label, written in elegant Latin script, cranium humanum, human skull, and next to it, the even more famous and prized ingredient, mumia. You imagine the apothecary taking one of these jars down from the shelf, removing heavy lid, and you brace yourself for what lies within. This is your entry into the deeply weird and grisly world of corpse medicine, and it is a mainstream historical fact that for centuries, remedies made from human body parts were not the secret spells of some dark sorcerer. They were a common, accepted, and often very expensive part of the official pharmacapa. At the top of this strange market was mumia, a dark, crumbly rainous powder made from the ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. It was imported at great cost from Thedums of the Nile Valley and was prescribed by the most learned physicians as a panacea, a cure-all for everything from a simple headache to internal bleeding and even the plague itself. The logic, as far as it went, was that the bum and other exotic resins used by the ancient Egyptians in their embalming processes held powerful, almost magical preservative qualities. It was believed that vowed by ingesting these substances, some of that preservative power, the defiance of decay, could be transferred to your own ailing body. The demand for authentic Egyptian mummy was so great that it created a problem of supply. Wick. Red and white pole. You've seen the barber surgeon's skill with a lancet for bloodletting. Now you will witness his true and most terrifying purpose. You're here to see a surgery. The shop has been transformed. A heavy wooden table, scrubbed but still stained with dark memories of past procedures, has been placed in the center of the room. On a cloth beside it, the barber surgeon is laying out his tools. They gleam in the dim light, an array of knives of different sizes, a small curved saw with sharp teeth, metal probes, hooks, and forceps. The air is thick with a tension that has nothing to do with humors or herbs. This is the medicine of last resort. This is the world of the knife. The patient is a man in middle age, his face pale and etched with the lines of long suffering. He is afflicted with a bladder stone, a common and excruciatingly painful condition of the era. He has tried every herbal remedy, every magical charm, and has finally come to this desperate choice: to endure the agony of the surgeon's knife, or to face a certain slow and agonizing death. He's helped onto the table. There is no operating theater, nostril field. There is only this room with its dust and its flies and its floorboard stained with blood and hair. Now you must understand the two great and terrible absences that define this entire experience. The first is anesthesia. There's nothing to dull the pain. The man on the table will feel everything. He has been given a large draught of strong wine to dull his senses, and he will be given a leather strap to bite down on to keep from biting through his own tongue. But he will be awake, aware, and fully conscious for the entire procedure. The second absence is any concept of germs or antiseptic practice. The surgeon's hands are unwashed. His fine steel instruments were perhaps wiped on a rag after their last use, but they are crawling with invisible bacteria. The very air is thick with them. This is the mainstream historicality of surgery. Even if the surgeon's knife did not kill you, the infection that followed almost certainly would. The procedure is a lithotomy, the removal of the bladder stone. It is one of the most dangerous and specialized operations of the age. The patient is forced onto his back and held down by two large, strong assistants. Their only job is to restrain the man when the agony becomes unbearable. To be the human clamps that hold him still, it's a job description that tells you everything you need to know about what is to come. The surgeon makes his incision. A muffled scream escapes the patient, his knuckles white as he grips the sides of the table. The surgeon works with a grim and focused speed. Speed is his only form of mercy. He cannot be gentle, he cannot be slow. He must get in, find the stone, and get out before the patient dies from shock and blood loss. He uses a metal probe to feel for the stone inside the bladder, then works a curved scoop-like instrument and beside it. There is a terrible grating sound. The patient thrashes on the table and the assistants bear down with all their weight. Finally, with a last agonizing pull, the surgeon extracts the stone, a jagged, ugly-looking mineral deposit, and holds it up in triumph. But the ordeal is not over. The wound is bleeding freely. How to stop it without fine sutures or an understanding of arteries? The primary method is cauterization. The surgeon's assistant takes a specially shaped iron from a glowing charcoal briar. It is red hot. The surgeon takes it and there is a moment of terrible anticipation before he presses the searing metal into the open. The patient screams, a sound that is barely human, and the room fills with acrid, sickening smell of burning flesh, but the bleeding stops. The operation, by the standards of the day, has been a success. The patient has survived the table, and this is where historians of did the renewed interest in anatomy during the Renaissance, the work of men like Vesalius, actually lead to better surgical outcomes for patients? Or did the profound ignorance of pain management and infection mean that survival rates were no better, and possibly even worse than in the darker ages that preceded it? Looking at the pale, trembling, and now horribly burned man on the table, you suspect that the motto of the Renaissance surgeon might as well have been the operation a success, but the patient died anyway. This kind of brutal life or death surgical spectacle was a relatively rare event. But there was another medical ordeal, one just as dangerous and agonizing, and that took place far more frequently. It happened not in the public space of the barber, surgeon shop, but in the private domestic space of the home. It was a trial of endurance and pain faced, not by men, but exclusively by women. And it was presided over not by a man with a knife and a university degree, but by a woman with practical experience and a collection of secret traditions. Your attention now turns away from the surgeon's table and toward the birthing to explore the perilous female-dominated world of Renaissance. You step away from the blood and iron of the barber-surgeon shop, a world dominated by men and their sharp instruments. Your journey now takes you into a space that was in the Renaissance almost exclusively female. You're led into a dark and stuffy bedchamber. The wooden shutters are closed tight, the tapestries have been hung over any cracks in the walls, and a large fire is roaring in the hearth, making the room uncomfortably hot. A young woman is in throes of labor, and this sealed, heated room is her medical theater. This is the world of childbirth. The first thing you notice is the complete absence of men. There is no physician here, no barber surgeon. This is a woman's sacred space, and to have a man present during the intimate act of birth was considered a grave violation of modesty. This is the mainstream historical fact of the matter. For centuries, childbirth was women's medicine. The laboring woman is surrounded by a support, a network of her female relatives, her mother, her sisters, her aunts, and experienced female neighbors. They are here to help, to comfort, and to witness. And at the center of this web directing the action is the most important person in the room, the midwife. The midwife is not a university-educated titular. She's an older woman, likely a mother herself many times over, whose authority comes not from books, but from years of practical hands-on experience. She's a respected and sometimes feared figure. In her community she's seen it all, and her knowledge has been passed down through a long informal apprenticeship from the midwife who came for her. She is a confidant, a coach, and the sole medical authority in this room. The atmosphere is not one of clinical procedure, but of ancient ritual. This is where you encounter the quirky and magical thinking that surrounded birth. Before the labor began in earnest, the women of the household would have gone through the home, untying every knot they could find on ropes, on bags, even on shoelaces. They would have unlocked every chest, every cupboard, every door. This was a form of sympathetic magic, a belief that physically undoing all the knots and locks in the house would help to magically open the womb and ensure a swift and easy delivery. The birthing chamber itself is adorned with protective charms and religious relics. A girdle that was said to have been worn by a female saint might be laid across the laboring woman's belly, believed to ease her pain and ward off the evil spirits that were thought to be drawn to the vulnerability of birth. The pre-Ella checklist was extensive. Boil water for washing, prepare clean linens, and measure to magically unlock every single container in a 3-block radius. The process of labor itself was a trial of endurance. The woman might be in labor for days, and the midwife's role was to support and guide her through it. She might encourage the laboring woman to walk around the room to use gravity to her advantage, or she might have her sit on a birthing stool, a special C-shaped chair with a hole in the seat that was designed to support the mother in a squatting position. The midwife would offer her sips of wine or special herbal concoctions to strengthen her contractions or calm her. Her job was to assist nature, not to intervene aggressively. But when things went wrong, her options were terrifyingly limited. If the baby was breached or the labor stalled, the midwife had no forceps, no vacuum extractors, no possibility of assistance. Her only tools were her hands, her experience, and her courage. She would try to manually turn the baby from the outside or even reach inside to correct its position. It was incredibly dangerous. Around a complicated birth was often a death sentence for the mother, the child, or most tragically both. Even after a successful birth, the danger was far from over. The mother now had to survive the childbed fever, the terrifying postpartum affection that was one of the leading killers of young women. Just as in the surgeon shop, there was no understanding of germs. The midwife's hands, the linens, the water, all could be sources of a fatal infection that would set in days after the delivery. This is where you see the precarious nature of the midwife's authority, a subject the historians still debate. Was she a respected and empowered female practitioner who held power over a vital part of community life? Or was she a marginalized and vulnerable figure, always one bad outcome away from ruin? A string of successful births would cement her reputation as wise and blessed. But if several mothers or babies in her care died, whispers would begin. In an age that believed in magic and malice, a midwife with a poor track record could easily find herself accused of incompetence, or far worse, of witchcraft. Being a midwife was a high-stakes profession. A 5-star review was a healthy baby in a grateful family. A 1-star review could be an accusation of being in league with the devil. But in this room, for now, the ordeal is over. A healthy baby has been born. The mother, exhausted but alive, holds her child. You've just witnessed an event that was for every Renaissance woman the single most dangerous and medical a profound moment of her life. It was a world of female solidarity, deep tradition, and profound ever-present. And this risk, this dance with death, reached its absolute peak during the great epidemics that periodically swept across the continent. When the most feared disease of all arrived in a town, a new and terrifying figure would appear on the streets, a specialist in dealing with the dying. Your attention now turns to the man in the long black cloak and the strange beaked mask, the plague doctor. You leave the hot sealed birthing chamber, a space of intense female ritual and profound risk. But the dangers of childbirth, as great as they were wary a private matter. When a true epidemic struck, the fear became a public all-consuming entity. When the plague arrived in a city, the animal rules of life and of medicine collapsed. A new sound fills the streets, not of commerce or laughter, but the slow rhythmic tolling of a church bell forth dead, and the grim cry of the cart driver, "Bring out your dead." The physicians you have met, the apothecaries, the barber surgeons, many of them have fled to the countryside, or have locked their doors or already dead themselves. Into this vacuum of terror and despair walks a new kind of specialist, a figure so strange and so terrifying he seems to have stepped out of a nightmare. This is the plague doctor. You see him from your window, moving slowly and deliberately through the deserted, silent streets. His form is iconic and deeply unsettling. Under he is covered from head to toe in a long, heavy coat of dark waxed leather meant to be impervious to the poisons in the air. He wears leather gloves on his hands, tall boots on his feet, and a wide-brimmed hat that signifies his status as a doctor. He carries a long wooden cane, which he uses to point and to examine people from a distance. But it is his head that draws your horrified gaze. He wears a mask unlike anything you have ever seen. It has round glass eyepieces making him look insane, and from these eyes extends a long curved bird-like beak, at least 6 and long. He eyes a walking omen, a human crow come to feast on the city's misery. This entire bizarre uniform was not designed for theatrical effect, but was a practical, if deeply flawed attempt at personal protective equipment. Its design is a mainstreamist, most famously credited to the 17th century French physician Charles Dorme. It was based on the prevailing scientific theory of how disease spread, the miasma theory. It was believed that the plague was not passed from person to person through touch, but was carried in the air itself in a poisonous, foul-smelling vapor known as a miasma. The doctor's waxed leather suit was meant to form a barrier, preventing this toxic air from touching his skin. And the beak was a primitive respirator, and this is its quirky aromatic secret. The hollow beak was stuffed with a potent, pungent blend of herbs and aromatic substances. This concoction, known as atherac, could include mint, cloves, myrrh, rose petals, camphor, and lavender. The doctor would breathe only through this perfume sponge, believing that the pleasant, strong smells would filter and purify the deadly miasma before it couldn't hurt his lungs. It was the world's first wearable life-or-death air freshener. But who is the man behind the mask? This is a subject historians continue to debate. Were these plague doctors brave heroes risking their lives on the front lines of an epidemic when all others had fled? Or were they largely second-rate physicians and charlatans unable to find more respectable work, who were hired by desperate city councils to perform a grim and thankless task? The evidence suggests that many were the latter. Their contracts often to require them less to cure the sick and more to simply keep a tally of the dead for civic records. They were hired not as saviors, but as accountants of the apocalypse. Their primary medical contribution was making the patient's last moments on Earth even more bizarre and frightening. The cures they offered were a desperate and useless application of the same humoral theory you've already encountered. They would use their canes to prod at patients, diagnosing their condition from afar. They might prescribe bloodletting to remove the pestilential humor from the blood, a treatment that would only further weaken an already dying patient. Their most common procedure was to lance the bubo-step in full swollen lymph nodes in the groin and armpits to drain the toxic pus, an act that was not only excruciatingly painful but also highly effective at spreading the bacterial infection everywhere. They might apply picuses made of strange ingredients like figs, onions, or even dried pigeon dung, believing these substances could draw the poison out. The long wooden cane was a vital it allowed the doctor to examine a patient, lift their bedclothes, and check their pulse, all without making physical contact. It was used to push aside the dead and dying who might litter the streets, and most importantly, it was a tool to keep the desperate, infected townspeople at a safe distance. It was a symbol not of healing, but of separation. The plague doctor in his strange and terrible uniform is a perfect symbol of Renaissance medicine in crisis. He's a figure of ultimate authority and utter helplessness. His costume is a monument to a deeply flawed but rational theory of disease, an attempt to impose order on a world consumed by chaos. His presence in the streets means that the normal world has ended. This intense focus on a single, terrifying disease of the body makes you wonder about the other ailments of theology, the ones that were not so visible. What about the diseases of the mind in a world where the four humors were believed to dictate your personality as well as your health? What happened when the mind itself appeared to break? You now turn your attention from the pestilence of the body to the equally mysterious and often terrifying world of Renaissance madness and melancholy. You retreat from the terrifying spectacle of the plague doctor, his beaked mask, a symbol of a world overwhelmed by a disease of the body. But now your journey takes you from the visible pestilence of the flesh into the invisible and equally misunderstood lens of the human mind. In an age where the humans were believed to govern not just your physical health but your very personality, what happened when the mind itself seemed to fall ill? How did the Renaissance world understand and treat the ailments we now call depression, anxiety, or psychosis? The answer, Asiles, is rooted in the all-encompassing theory of the four humors. This is the mainstream historical fact of Renaissance psychology. Your mental state was a direct reflection of your internal fluid balance. If you were suffering from what we would now call clinical depression, a state of profound sadness, lethargy, and despair, a physician would diagnose you with an excess of black bile. This humor, you'll recall, was cold and dry, linked to the of earth in the season of autumn. An overabundance of this melancholic humor would literally make you melancholy. Conversely, if a person was exhibiting signs of mania or frenzy, boundless energy, erratic behavior, wild anger, or delusions, the diagnosis was an excessive yellow bile or choler. This humor was hot and dry, linked tough element of fire. Too much of this fiery substance in your system would overheat your brain, cooking your reason and leading to madness. Every aspect of your personality, from a bad mood to a complete psychotic break, could be explained by this simple, elegant, and deeply flawed diagnostic chart. The treatments prescribed flow directly from this diagnosis. For the wealthy melancholic, the treatment could be surprisingly gentle and modern-seeming. This is a quirky and revealing tidbit about the class divide in mental health care. If you were a sad nobleman or a poet suffering from fashionable artist melancholy, your physician would prescribe a regimen to counteract your cold, dry humor. You would be advised to eat warm and moist foods, to take warm baths infused with pleasant herbs, and to surround yourself with beauty. You might be told to listen to specific kinds of uplifting music, to look at beautiful works of art, or to engage in gentle, rational conversation with learned friends. The goal was to soothe the troubled mind and gently rebalance its humoral state. For mania, the treatment was more aggressive. To counteract the excess heat of yellow bile, a patient would be subjected to cooling therapies. This meant a diet of cucumbers, melons, and other cold foods. But it also inevitably meant bloodletting. A patient in a state of frenzy would babble often repeatedly in an attempt to remove the heat from their brain and calm their agitated spirits. But what happened when a person's madness didn't fit neatly into these categories? What if their behavior was not just sad or angry, but truly bizarre? This is where historians debate the blurry line between medical and supernatural explanations for madness. Was a woman who spoke in strange voice suffering from a humoral imbalance, or was she possessed by a demon? Was Amun who saw visions a lunatic, his mind affected by the moon? Or was he a holy mystic receiving divine insight? The diagnosis often depended entirely on the patient's social status, the specific intent of their delusions, and the biases of the person observing them. The diagnostic flowchart was roughly: are they sad, melancholy? Are they angry, mania? Are they angry and claiming to be the Antichrist? That's a different department, for those whose madness was considered incurable, or for the poor who could not afford private, gentle treatments. Theft destination was the asylum. And to understand the asylum, you're taken to the gates of the most famous mental institution in the world, the Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London. Known to its terrified public by its nickname, Bedtime, what you find inside is not a hospital, it is a human zoo. There is no therapy, no treatment, no compassion. The inmates or lunatics are treated like animals. You see men and women chained to the walls of tiny, filthy stone cells lying naked in their own waste. You hear a constant cacophony of shrieking, weeping, and incoherent babbling. And here you witness the most shocking part of Bedtime's reality. It was a tourist attraction. For a small admission fee, a penny or two, members of the public could come and spend an afternoon wandering the corridors, staring at, mocking, and provoking the inmates for their own amusement. A fun day out for a respectable London family might include a picnic, a trip to see a play, and then an afternoon at Bedtime Tolo at the antics of the mad. It was a place where the profound suffering of the mentally ill was turned into a cheap and popular form of public entertainment. You flee from the horrifying chaos of Bedtime, the sounds of human misery echoing in your ears. The treatment of mentally ill in the Renaissance was a dark mirror of its medicine. A mixture of flawed scientific theory, superstition, and for the poor and helpless, a level of cruelty that is difficult to comprehend. The doctors tried to rebalance the body's humors with their prescriptions and their bleeding. But there was another group of practitioners working at the intersection of medicine, science, and magic, who believed the answer to all disease lay not in balancing the body's existing fluids, but in creating new perfect ones. They sought to cure illness by purifying matter itself. Your journey now takes you from the physician's study and into the smoky secret world of the alchemist laboratory. You retreat from the haunting cries of Bedtime, leaving behind the world of medicine, based on the body's natural, if unbalanced fluids. Your journey now takes you to a place far hotter, scoria, and more secretive. You find yourself in a cellar or a backroom workshop, the air thick with the heat from a furnace and the sharp metallic smell of strange chemicals. The walls are covered not with anatomical charts but with cryptic diagrams of planets and symbols. This is the laboratory of the alchemist. And here medicine was not about balancing but about transformation. The alchemist, who was often also a physician, subscribed to a different theory of the body. While he might pay lip service to the four humors, he believed that on a deeper level man was a chemical being. This new movement, championed by figures like the famous Paracelsus, was called theatrocastry or chemical medicine. This is the mainstream historical fact that marked a radical break with the past. Instead of seeing the body as a vessel of blood, phlegm, and bile, the iatrocchemist saw it as a combination of three primal substances: salt representing the physical body, sulfur representing the fiery discombustible, and mercury representing the volatile transfervite spirit. Sickness was not an imbalance of fluids, but a failure in the body's internal alchemy, a corruption of its essential chemical nature. The ultimate goal of alchemy was the legendary great work to discover the philosopher's stone, a substance that could transmute base metals like lead into pure gold. But this quest had a medical twin. It was believed that whatever could perfect metal, it could also perfect the human body. And so the alchemist also sought an elixir of life, a universal cure that could heal all diseases, reverse aging, and grant a form of immortality. In this mystical and dangerous quest for the elixir, alchemists created and prescribed a whole new class of medicines. They turned away from the gentle herbs of the apothecary and toward the powerful and often deadly world of minerals and metals. A new untreatable disease, syphilis, was sweeping across Europe at this time, and the old humoral remedies were useless against it. But the alchemists discovered that a powerful metallic poison, mercury, could actually halt the disease's progression. Patients were treated by being slathered in mercury-based ointments or by sitting in a sealed box with mercury being heated below them, forcing them to inhale the toxic vapors. The cure was a horrifying ordeal. The mercury poisoning would cause the patient's teeth to fall out, their gums to rot, and their nervous system to decay. But it did often kill the syphilis spirit. It was a desperate chemical gamble, a cure that was often just as devastating as the disease. One of the most quirky and popular iatrochemical remedies was the antimony cup. Antimony is a highly toxic. A cup would be cast from this metal, and a patient would be instructed to leave wine in it overnight as it sat. The acidic wine would leach trace amounts of the toxic antimony into the liquid. The patient would then drink the wine. The result was predictable: violent convulsive vomiting and purging that would last for hours. In the logic of the time, this was seen as a fantastically successful treatment, a powerful and dramatic way to cleanse its body of its corrupt humors and poisons. It was a very effective and frisky weight loss plan, with the primary side effect being the possibility of a swift and agonizing death. This is where historians of science debate the legacy of iatrochemistry. Was it a genuine step toward modern pharmacology, introducing the vital concept that specific chemical compounds could be used to fight disease? Or was it a dangerous and often fatal detour that replaced relatively harmless, if ineffective, herbal teas with deadly metallic poisons? The iatrochemists were the first to look for a magic bullet, a specific cure for a specific ailment. But their bullets were often made of fleet and arsenic. It was a bold medical philosophy. Let's stop trying to fix your cough with mint and instead see what happens if we give you a spoonful of poison. The ultimate alchemical medicine was or impotable or portable gold. This was a liquid concoction, often a brilliant ruby-red color that was said to contain the essence of gold itself. It was incredibly difficult and expensive to make, and was hailed by its proponents as a powerful elixir that could cure heart conditions, purify the blood, and prolong life. It was the ultimate luxury medicine for kings and popes, though it likely had no real effect whatsoever. Euler alchemist's smoky laboratory, the acrid taste of his chemical creation still on your tongue. This new world of iatrochemistry with its toxic metals and mystic apothecaries represents a profound and dangerous break from the ancient traditions of medicine. That is an attempt not just to rebalance the body but to fundamentally transform it. This desire to transform, to physically alter the body to cure it, sometimes took an even more direct and surgical form. There was one ancient procedure, part medicine and part magic, that sought to cure the mind by opening a physical door into the head itself. Your attention now turns to the strange, ancient, and surprisingly persistent practice of drilling holes into the human skull. Trapation, you pull Yorman from the alchemist's smoky laboratory with its promise of chemical transformation, and its reality of you find yourself once again in the stark, practical world of the barber surgeon. But the procedure being prepared today is not for a bladder stone or a gangrenous limb. It is something older, more mysterious, and in many ways more terrifying. A patient is on the table, held firmly by several assistants, but his body is not the focus. The surgeon's attention and his sharp steel tools are aimed directly at the man's head. You're about to witness one of the oldest surgical procedures known to mankind. This is the mainstream historical fact that makes the practice so fascinating. Drilling a hole in the human skull is not a Renaissance invention. Archaeologists have discovered trepan skulls dating back to the Neolithic period thousands of years ago. The Renaissance surgeon standing here with his brace and drill is continuing a tradition that stretches back into the Oedipus mists of prehistory, a direct link to the very first shamans and medicine men. Why on earth would anyone deliberately drill a hole in a person's head in the Renaissance? There were two distinct sets of reasons, one surprisingly rational and the other deeply mystical. The rational reason was to treat severe head trauma. If a man fell from a horse or was struck in the head during a battle, his skull might be fractured. A surgeon might perform a trepation to relieve pressure from swelling on the brain or to lift a depressed fracture and remove splinters of bone that have been pushed inwards. In these cases, it was a desperate telephasing measure, a logical, if incredibly, risky surgical intervention. But this practical application was far less common than the mystical one. This is the quirky and chilling tidbit about the procedure. Trepation was most often prescribed for conditions seated deep within the brain itself: epilepsy, chronic migraines, and madness. The underlying theory was that their patient's ailment, the falling sickness of a seizure, or the delusions of insanity, was caused by a malevolent entity trapped inside the skull. It might be a bad vapor generated by an imbalance of the humors, or it might be a literal demon. The skull, therefore, was a sealed prison, and the trepation was not meant to repair the brain but to create an escape hatch. The hole was a doorway, an exit through which the evil spirit or corrupt humor could be released, freeing the patient. It was in essence a surgical exorcism. Patient seems to be possessed. You say, "Pass me the drill. We'll soon have that spirit out of him." You watch as the procedure begins. The patient is held down, fully conscious, a leather strap between his teeth. The surgeon takes his primary tool. It might be a circular saw called a trafina, which has a sharp central pin to steady it and is rotated with a brace slowly cut. A neat circular plug of bone, or he might use a simpler drill to make a series of holes and then cut between them. You hear the slow grating scraping sound of the steel tool against the bone of the man's skull. A sound that seems to vibrate through the very air in the room, a sound the man on the table must feel in the core of his being. The surgeon works with immense care, for the slightest slip could pierce the delicate membranes beneath and plunge the instrument into the brain itself. The question of whether anyone actually survived this procedure is a topic that archaeologists and medical historians fiercely debate. On one hand, the evidence from thousands of ancient skulls is undeniable. Many show clear signs of healing, with the edges of the hole rounded off by new bone growth, proving that the patient lived for months or even years after the operation. But in a Renaissance setting, without anesthesia or sanitation, the risks were extreme. Even if the surgeon's hand was steady, the chance of dying from shock on the table or from a raging infection in the days that followed it was immense. The success of the procedure was also conveniently difficult to disprove. If the patient began screaming during the operation, it wasn't because of the unimaginable pain. It was clearly the sound of the demon finally escaping through its new exit. Finally, with a last careful twist, the surgeon lifts away the small circular piece of bone. The rondelle, it is done. The hole is open. The patient lies trembling, his fate now in the hands of God and the ever-present threat of infection that seeped through the unwashed hands and tools of the surgeon. This small piece of bone might be kept by the patient and worn as a powerful amulet, a physical token of his ordeal and his cure. Trepanation stands as one of the most dramatic and unsettling procedures in the history of medicine, a strange and potent intersection of practical surgery, ancient superstition, and humoral theory. But while this terrifying head surgery was a rare event, there was another far more common form of facial surgery that almost every person in the Renaissance lived in dread of. It was a procedure born of sugary diets among the rich, non-existent hygiene for the poor, and the universal human experience of agonizing pain. Your attention now moves just a few inches down from the skull to the mouth, as you prepare to explore the terrifying world of Renaissance dental care and the brutal work of the tooth drawer. Your retreat from the strange, heady world of surgical exorcism, your mind still echoing with the imagined sound of a drill on bone. But now, a new and far more familiar emissary begins to assert itself. It starts as a dull through in your jaw, a sensitivity to hot and cold. Soon it blossoms into a relentless pain. You have a rotten abscess tooth. And in the Renaissance, this universal human torment was a gateway to a special kind of hell. Your first recourse might be folk remedies. You might be advised to apply a pus of figs and herbs to your cheek, to rinse your mouth with wine, or to recite a charm against the tiny invisible toothworms that were belliavetto be gnawing away at your jaw. But when the pain becomes unbearable, when your face swells up and the fever sets in, you know that charms and herbs will not suffice. There is only one real cure for a rotten tooth in this age, and that is to have it pulled. This is the mainstream fact of Renaissance dentistry. The profession of dentistry as we know it did not exist. There were no fillings, no root canals, no preventative care. There was only extraction, and this brutal, painful job fell to the same man who had bled you and might offer you a shave, the barber surgeon. Or if you were in a village or at a country fair, it might be performed by an even less qualified itinerant tooth drawer. A specialist in this one violent act. You return with a heart full of dread to the shop with the red and white pole. You sit in the chair and the barber surgeon lays out his dental instruments. They do not look like the precise, delicate tools of a modern dentist. They look like they belong in a blacksmith's forge or a torturous chamber. You see an array of heavy iron forceps and pliers of different shapes and sizes, their jaws crude and ill-fitting. But the most terrifying of these instruments, and the centerpiece of the tooth drawer's kit, was a device known as the dental pelican. It was named for its shape, which featured a sharp curved claw that resembled a pelican's beak. It was not designed to pull a tooth straight up, but to rip it out sideways using the principle of leverage. The claw would be hooked over the top of the rotten tooth while a metal bolster, the fulcrum, was placed on the gums next to it. The barber surgeon would then grip the handle and with his full body weight apply immense force, prying the tooth out of its socket. The sheer power of the pelican was such that it would often break the tooth, leaving the painful root behind, or break the patient's jaw or shatter the neighboring healthy teeth. The dental pelican was so named because it looked like a pelican's beak, and it also made you want to fly away in terror. The procedure itself was a triumph of brute force over finesse. With no anesthetic, you would be held firmly in the chair by a broy assistant. The tooth drawer would peer into your mouth, perhaps poking the offending tooth with a sharp metal probe to confirm it was the right one. He would select his instrument of choice, get the best grip could on the slippery, rotten crown of the tooth, and then the battle would begin. It was a matter of twisting, rocking, and pulling, a violent wrestling match between the practitioner and the deeply rooted tooth. You would feel the hideous pressure in your jaw, the tearing of the ligaments, until with a final sickening crack, the root would give away and the tooth would be ripped free. This widespread dental decay, especially among the upper classes, was a relatively new phenomenon, and it leads to a question that historians of public health still debate. Was the introduction of sugar to Europe on a mass scale the single greatest public health disaster of the period? With sugar becoming more available, the wealthy, like Queen Elizabeth I, who was famous for her black, rotten teeth, consumed it in vast quantities, leading to an epidemic of cavities that the existing medical system was completely unequipped to handle after the extraction. The after-air was minimal. The bleeding socket might be packed with a bit of cloth soaked in a stypic herb to help it clot. The risk of a severe or potentially fatal infection in your now mangled jaw was incredibly high. If you were wealthy and had lost many teeth, you could commission false ones. These dentures were carved from ivory or bone, or most gruesomely were made from real human teeth, harvested from the mouths of dead soldiers on the battlefield or purchased from the desperately poor who would sell their own healthy teeth to a tooth broker for a few shillings. You stumble out of the barber surgeon shop, your mouth full of blood, your jaw throbbing with a new, even more profound pain. You've survived one of the most common and universally dreaded medical experiences of the Renaissance. The man who treated you was at least a licensed member of a guild, a settled craftsman with a reputation to uphold. But not all who claimed med were so established. The roads, market towns, and country fairs of Renaissance Europe were teeming with a different sort of practitioner altogether. Your attention now turns from the established, if terrifying, world of official medicine to the noisy, theatrical, and deeply dishonest world of traveling quacks and charlatans, and the useless miracle cures they sold from the back of a cart. You stumble away from the barber surgeon's chair, your jaw a universe of throbbing pain, the metallic taste of blood thick in your mouth. You have now experienced the best that official guild-sanctioned Renaissance medicine has to offer. A flawed diagnosis from a physician, a bizarre prescription from an apothecary, and a brutal bloody procedure from a surgeon. It is no wonder then that many people, faced with this terrifying reality, sought out alternatives. Your journey now takes you away from the established headships and into the noisy, chaotic and vibrant world of a town fair to meet every different kind of doctor. In the center of the bustling market square, a large crowd is gathered around a small, portable wooden stage. On this stage stands a man who is part entertainer, part salesman, and part physician. He's dressed not in the sober black robes of a doctor, but in flamboyant, brightly colored silks and a ridiculous feathered hat. He might have a trained monkey on his shoulder, or be juggling brightly colored balls. He is a master of drawing a crowd. This is the mountebank, the traveling quack doctor, and he's here to sell you a miracle. This is the mainstream historical reality of the medical marketplace. Outside the official regulated world of the guilds, these itinerant charlatans roam the countryside, moving from one market day to the next. The name quack came from the Dutch, quack salva, meaning someone who quacks or boasts about their salves, and boasting was their primary skill. The mountebank, whose name comes from the Italian for mount on a bench, has set up a stage to rise above the crowd and put on a show. Once he has everyone's attention with his jokes and his acrobatics, the real performance begins. He launches into a spellbinding, fast-ticking sales pitch. He dismisses the university physicians as pompous fools who know nothing of real-world cures, their heads buried in dusty thousand-year-old books. He mocks the barber surgeons as clumsy butchers, who will do you more harm than good. He, and only he proclaims, has traveled the world and learned the secret, ancient remedies that the official doctors don't want you to know about. His marketing strategy was brutally effective. Are you tired of being told your only options are to be bled with leeches or to eat powdered skulls? Well, have I got a revolutionary new product for you. He now produces his miracle cure. It is a small dark bottle filled with unoily liquid. He gives it a fancy exotic sounding name like the celestial tincture or the true balsam of life. He claims this single elixir is a panacea, a cure for everything that ails you. It will soothe your gout, banish your fever, cure your melancholy, regrow your hair, and yes, even protect you from theplig. He spins a fantastic story about its origin. Perhaps he learned the secret recipe from a wise old hermit on a remote mountain, or it was gifted to him by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire himself. To prove the astonishing power of his remedy, he calls for a volunteer from the crowd who is suffering from a terrible ailment. This is where the quirky enthusiasm of his business is revealed. A man stumbles out of the crowd, groaning and clutching his stomach, his face pallid with mock agony. This man is, of course, the mountebank's assistant, his still. The quack doctor gives his assistant a single spoonful of the miraculous tonic. The man shudders dramatically, his eyes rolling back in his head. The crowd gasps. Then, after a moment of tense silence, the man leaps to his feet, stretches his arms, and declares himself completely cured, shouting the praises of the doctor and his amazing elixir. It was the original before and after advertisement, just performed live and with a great deal more fake groaning. The crowd, now completely convinced, surges forward, their hands outstretched with coins, desperate to purchase a bottle of this miraculous cure. And this is where historians and sociologists debate the true role of the quack. Was he simply a cynical predator, a charlatan, exploiting the fears and ignorance of desperate people? Or did he, in a strange way, fill a genuine social and psychological need, faced with an official medical system that was expensive, agonizingly painful, and often ineffective? The quack offered something that the physician and the surgeon did not. Hope. He offered a simple, painless, magical solution to complex and terrifying problems. He sold hope in a bottle, and for people with no other options, that was a powerful and seductive commodity. You watch as the mountebank does a brisk trade, his bag growing heavy with coins. His miracle cure is likely nothing more than colored water, cheap wine, and a few harmless herbs, but he sells it with a confidence and a charisma that the learned physician could never match. This reliance on theatrical quacks and their useless potions highlights a fundamental truth about the Renaissance medical landscape. The official institutions that were supposed to provide care were often so terrifying and ineffective that people will flock to any alternative, no matter how outlandish this was. Especially true of the one institution that bore the name hospital. Your journey now takes you away from the noise of the fair and towards the quiet, solemn doors of one of these institutions. You're about to discover why. For most people in the Renaissance, a hospital is not seen as a place to get better, but as a place you went to die. You flee the noisy, chaotic world of the mountebank and his fraudulent cures, the shouts of the charlatan still ringing in your ears. His success highlights a profound truth about this age. The official institutions of medicine were often so edifying or inaccessible that people would turn anywhere else for hope. That this was especially true of the one place that was nominally dedicated to healing the sick. Your journey now takes you to the tall, solemn doors of a Renaissance hospital. Prepare to discover why most people believed you only went through these doors to die. You stand before a large imposing stone building. It does not look like a modern hospital. It looks like a cathedral or a story. This is a place like the Great Hotel d'Or in Paris or the Hôpital de l'Enenti in Florence, and its appearance tells you everything about its true purpose. This brings you to the mainstream historical fact that redefines the entire institution. Renaissance hospitals were not primarily medical centers. They were religious and charitable foundations, and their mission was to care for the soul, not necessarily to cure the body. The very root of the word hospital is the same as for hospitality. These institutions were originally founded to provide shelter and care for pilgrims and strangers. By the Renaissance, their mission had shifted to providing for the deserving poor, the elderly, the orphaned, and the terminally ill who had no family to care for them and no money to pay for a private physician. The hospital was run not by a board of doctors, but by a religious order of monks or nuns. Their goal was not to practice cutting-edge medicine, but to ensure that a poor soul could have a good death, to die in a state of grace with prayers, confession, and the last rites. You step through massive doors, and the air inside is cool and still. You're not in a series of small private rooms, but in a single vast cavernous hall. The ceiling is high and vaulted like the nave of a church, and indeed at the far end of the ward stands a fully consecrated altar where Mass is said daily. The light streams in through tall arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The hall is lined with 2 long rows of beds. The overwhelming sounds are not the beeping of machines, but the soft rustle of nuns' habits and the low constant murmur of prayers. You walk down the aisle between the beds, and you notice something strange and deeply unsettling. The beds are enormous, far larger than necessary for one person, and in each bed you see 2, 3, sometimes even 4 patients, all bundled together under the same coarse blankets. This is the quirky and horrifying reality of hospital care. In an age of scarce resources, a young woman dying of consumption might find herself sharing a mattress with an old man suffering from dysentery and a boy with a festering gangrenous wound. A patient with a contagious fever would be put in with everyone else. It was born of necessity, a way to house the maximum number of people and to use shared body heat to keep the sick warm. But it was also a terrifyingly efficient system for ensuring the rapid spread of every imaginable infection. The hospital's admission policy was essentially there's always room for one more. A lovely sentiment until he realized it meant in the same bed as 3 other people with a variety of communicable diseases. What of the medical treatment? A physician, often donating his time for the good of his soul, might make a weekly round, but there was little heckle due for the sheer volume of dying patients. Barber surgeons were almost never called, as expensive and painful not the purpose of this place. The daily care was provided by the nuns. They would bring what food the hospital's charity could afford. They would wash the patients' faces, and above all, they would pray with them. The focus was always on the spiritual, not the physical. The body was seen as a temporary and failing vessel. Why waste time, money, and effort on likely futile medical interventions? When the patient's immortal soul was at stake, the hospital had a very clear, if limited, treatment plan. Prayer followed. By more prayer, with a final generous dose of prayer for good measure. And this leads to a debate that continues among historians today. Were these hospitals, for all their medical failings, a positive social force? Did they represent the best of the Christian ideal of charity, providing a vital safety net and a place of comfort and dignity for the destitute in their final hours? Or by focusing so heavily on salvation over survival, did they represent a form of social control that encouraged the poor to passively accept their earthly suffering in exchange for a promised reward in the life? You look at the face of a dying man in one of the beds. A nun is holding his hand, whispering a prayer in his ear. He's not dying alone in a filthy alley. He's here in a clean bed in a sacred space. His death will be noted, his soul prayed for all its medical failures. The hospital offered a humanity that was often absent from the world outside its. It was in the truest sense of the word a hospice. This profound reliance on spiritual care was not limited to the institutionalized for the vast majority of people in the Renaissance, from the richest king to the poorest peasant. Their first and most trusted line of defense against sickness was not the physician, the apothecary, or the surgeon. It was their own personal faith. Your attention now turns away from all these varied practitioners and institutions to explore the most powerful and pervasive form of healing in the Renaissance world. The direct appeal to God through prayer, the intervention of saints, and the miraculous touch of holy relics. Section 17. You leave the quiet, solemn world of the Renaissance hospital, a place where medicine admitted its failures and prayer took over. This turn to the spiritual in the face of death was not just a feature of the hospital. It was a central pillar of the entire Renaissance healthcare experience. For the vast majority of people, from the peasant in his hut to the king on his throne, the first line of defense against sickness was not a physician, an apothecary, or a surgeon. It was a direct appeal to the divine. Imagine your fever has returned, or the dull chain in your jaw has once again become a throbbing agony. Your first instinct is not to send for the barber surgeon. Your first act is to fall to your knees. You go to your local parish church, the center of your community and your worldview. You kneel in the cool and incessant darkness surrounded by images of saints and martyrs and you pray. But this was not just a general prayer for health. The heavens, like the guilds on earth, had specialists that this is the quirky and deeply ingrained reality of faith-based healing. You directed your prayers to a specific patron saint who had expertise in your particular ailment. This is a mainstream historical fact that governed the spiritual life of the era. If you were suffering from a terrible toothache, you would light a candle and pray to Saint Apollonia, a martyr who, according to legend, had all of her teeth violently shattered before her death. For a sore throat or for a child choking on a fishbone, you would appeal to some Blaze, who was said to have performed a similar miracle. There was an entire celestial directory of medical specialists. Saint Lawrence, who was martyred on a grill, was the patron saint of burns. Saint Vitus was the one to call on for epilepsy or any ailment involving witching, which gave us the name Saint Vitus Dance. And for the most feared disease of all, the plague, you would pray to Saint Roe, who had contracted the plague himself, but survived, through the grace of God, and who was famously depicted in paintings pointing to a plague boo on his own thigh. It was a form of divine health insurance, and it was vital to ensure your prayer was being sent to the correct department if you wanted your claim to be processed. For a more powerful intervention, prayer alone was not enough. You needed to come into physical contact with holiness. This meant seeking out a holy relic. You might make a journey of several days to a nearby cathedral or monastery that was famous for housing the relic of a powerful saint, perhaps a splinter of bone, a lock of hair, a piece of their clothing, or an object they were said to have touched. You would enter the church and the relic housed in a beautiful and ornate container called a reliquary would be presented to you. You would kneel before it, perhaps being allowed to touch or even kiss the relic. You might be given water that the relic had been dipped into, and you would drink this holy water as the most powerful medicine of all. For the most serious of illnesses, you might undertake the ultimate act of faith, a pilgrimage. You would leave your home and travel for weeks or months to one of the great healing shrines of Europe, like the Tomba Festi. Thomas Becket at Canterbury. The arduous journey itself, the walking, the hardship, the constant prayer was seen as part of the cure, a physical testament to your devotion. When you finally arrived, you would pray at the shrine and leave a votive offering. This was often a small wax model of the afflicted body part, a pair of eyes if you were seeking a cure for blindness, a leg if you were lame, a heart for a spiritual ailment. The walls of sickrooms were covered with thousands of these small wax limbs and organs, a silent, powerful testament to the hopes and sufferings of 1,000 pilgrims. And this leads to a question that historians and theologians still debate. What was the true power of this system of faith healing? Did the intense belief, the hope, and the ritual provide genuine psychosomatic relief that could actually aid the body's own healing processes? Or did this focus on saints and relics foster a sense of fatalism, diverting people from the few practical earthly remedies that might have actually helped them? The patient who recovered after a pilgrimage had no doubt the saint had cured him. The patient who died was simply not devout enough, or their time on earth had come. The system was self-affirming, and for those who believed, a powerful source of comfort in a world of pain. You leave the great echoing cathedral, the scent of centuries of incense in your clothes and a newfound sense of hope in your heart. You've put your trust in the most powerful and accessible form of medicine in the Renaissance world. This was the baseline against which all other medical practitioners, the physicians with their humoral charts, the apothecaries with their strange compounds, the surgeons with their terrifying knives had to compete. For centuries, this medical world had remained a stable, if strange, tapestry woven from these threads of ancient Greek theory, Christian faith, and folk tradition. But now, in the full flower of the Renaissance, a few arrogant, brilliant, and revolutionary figures were beginning to pull at the threads of this ancient fabric. They were beginning to question the old authorities, to challenge the thousand-year-old texts, and to propose radical new ways of understanding the human body. Your journey now introduces you to one of the greatest of these medical rebels, a fiery, Swiss-German physician and alchemist who mostly learned the books of the ancient masters and declared that a doctor must learn from the book of nature, not the writings of other men. You're about to meet the formidable and famously difficult Paracelsus. You leave the quiet, reverent world of the cathedral where healing was a matter of faith and prayer. For centuries, this faith, combined with the ancient medical theories of the Greeks, formed an unshakable foundation. To question the medical writings of Galen or Hippocrates was like questioning the Bible itself. But now, in the 16th century, the age of the Protestant Reformation and the printing press, the air is thick with rebellion. You're about to meet the most flamboyant, arrogant, and influential medical rebel of the age. The scene is a public square in the city of Basel, Switzerland. On a midsummer's day in 1527, a great bonfire has been lit, and a crowd of shocked university students and grim-faced physicians has gathered. Amon, dressed not in the respectable, dark robes of a scholar but in the dusty clothes of a traveler, stands before theft. In his hands are priceless leather-bound volumes, the great medical encyclopedias of Galen and Avicii, the foundational texts of all medicine for the last 1,000 years. Then with a dramatic flourish he hurls books into the fire. This is the mainstream historical fact that has become his legend. The man is Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. But the world would know him by the name he gave himself. Paracelsus, his chosen name, tells you everything you need to know about his personality. It means beyond Salus Celsus being a famous and respected Roman physician. Paracelsus was in his own mind superior to all who came before him. He was by all accounts a difficult, arrogant, and often drunken man. A wanderer who brawled in taverns and was chased out of almost every city he ever worked in. But he was also a brilliant and profoundly original thinker who sought to tear down the entire rotten edifice of ancient medicine. As the books of Galen turned to ash, he famously declared that even the hairs on his own beard had more knowledge than all the doctors of the universities, and that the buckles on his shoes were more learned than the ancient masters. He furiously rejected the theory of the four humours. The body, he argued, was not a sack of four liquids, it was a chemical laboratory, a microcosm of the universe governed by three essential principles. He called thetriop, prima, salt, representing the stable material body, representing the fiery expansive soul, and mercury representing the volatile transformative spirit. Sickness to Paracelsus was not a humoral imbalance. It was a chemical defect, a failure of the body's internal alchemy. This chemical worldview led him to champion a new radical form of medicine, iatrochemistry. He believed that the cures for disease were not to be found in balancing hot and cold foods, but in powerful concentrated chemical substances. And this led to his most enduring contribution to science, a quirky but profound tidbit that is now the central principle of toxicology. Paracelsus is credited with the idea that solidosis facit venom, the dose matters poison. He argued that doctors should not shy away from using powerful mineral poisons like arsenic, antimony, and mercury. The key was the dose. A large amount of arsenic would surely kill a man, but a tiny, carefully prepared dose he believed could be a powerful medicine to target a specific disease. Like an arrow aimed at a target, his philosophy was essentially what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, with a very important fine print. Being both to have to be extremely careful with the dosage because this stuff will almost certainly kill you. Paracelsus was a man of immense contradictions, a figure who stood with one foot in the new world of science and the other planted firmly in the world of magic and mysticism. And this is where historians have long struggled to categorize him, debating whether he should be seen as the father of modern pharmacology for his revolutionary work in chemical medicine, or as a mystical anti-rational charlatan whose work was steeped in magic and astrology. He championed the doctrine of synchronicity, believing God's clues were written in the shapes of plants. He consulted astrological charts to determine the best time for treatment. He was the kind of doctor who might prescribe a chemically precise dose of a metallic salt, but would insist you only take it when Jupiter was in proper alignment with Saturn. His tempestuous, rebellious life ended as chaotically as it was lived. He was driven out of his teaching position in Basel after less than a year, and he died in relative obscurity. But his ideas, like the chemical reactions he so admired, had been unleashed. The bonfire in that Swiss care was a signal that the age of unquestioning belief in the ancient authorities was over. Paracelsus had declared that the truth was not to be found in the library, but in the book of nature and in the human body itself. But to truly learn from the book of the human body, you have to be allowed to pun it. The Galenic physicians who had followed the ancient texts for centuries were forbidden from performing human dissection. Their knowledge of anatomy was based on the dissection of animals and on ancient, often flawed descriptions. A new kind of rebel was needed, not alchemist who saw the body as a spiritual furnace, but a physician who saw it as a beautiful, intricate machine that could have taken apart and understood. Your attention now turns from the smoky labs of Switzerland to a brightly lit anatomy theater in Padua, Italy, where a brilliant young anatomist is about to change what it means to see the human form. You're about to meet Andreas Philis. You leave the smoky, chaotic world of Paracelsus with his bonfire of ancient books and his alchemical cures. His rebellion was one of chemistry and philosophy, a furious attack on the theoretical foundations of ancient medicine. But another quieter and perhaps ever more profound revolution was needed. It was a revolution not of theory but of a simple observation. It required a rebel who would trust the evidence of his own eyes over the sacred words of a 1,000-year text. To witness this, you travel now to a Grace University in Padua, Italy, and enter a packed anatomy theater. The room is built like a small, steep coliseum with circular tiers of wooden benches rising up around a central table. The air is tense with anticipation. In the center of the room on the table lies a human cadaver, the body of a recently executed criminal. Standing beside it is the brilliant, charismatic young anatomist Andreas Philis. To understand the revolution about to witness, you must first understand how anatomy was traditionally taught. For centuries, the professor of anatomy, a learned physician, would sit high above the proceedings in a grand throne-like chair, completely removed from the body itself. He would hold a copy of the ancient text of Galen, the undisputed master, and would read aloud the relevant passages in Latin. Down below, a lowly barber surgeon, considered a mere manual laborer, would perform the actual messy work of cutting. A third figure, a demonstrator, would stand by with a wooden pointer, indicating the parts of the body as the professor named them from the book. The unquestioned truth was in the text. If the body on the table appeared to contradict the words of Galen, it was assumed that the body was deformed or thought the surgeon had made a mistake. The book was never wrong. Velius changes gravity in a dramatic break with tradition. He descends from the professor's chair. He dismisses the surgeon and the pointer. He takes the scalpel into his own hands. He believes that the ultimate medical textbook is not the work of Galen but the human body itself, the book of nature, and as he begins to dissect, he does the unthinkable. He starts to prove Galen. This is the mainstream historical fact that forms the foundation of modern. As his students watch, mesmerized, Velius calmly and systematically dismantles the authority of a millennium. He addresses the jawbone. Galen tells who might say that the human mandible is composed of two separate bones. He then holds up the single, solid U-shaped bone he's just dissected. As you can all plainly see, he was mistaken. Galen had based his human anatomy on the dissection of dogs and pigs whose mandibles are indeed in two parts. He moves to the chest. Galen describes the sternum as having 7 segments. He points with his blade. The human sternum has only 3. Galen's model was based on the monkeys he had dissected. He moves to the liver, which Galen had described as having 5 lobes like that of a barber ape. The Salas reveals the 2-lobed liver of a human being. On and on it went. Over 200 errors in Galen's work were corrected by Vesalius's simple revolutionary act of looking for more than 1,000 years. All of Western medicine had been navigating the human body with the wrong map. It would be like discovering that your most trusted mechanic had been trying to fix your car using the instruction manual for a horse-drawn cart. Of course, to conduct this kind of revolutionary hands-on research, the Salas needed a steady supply of its primary material, fresh human bodies. And this leads to a quirky and grisly tidbit about his methods. In an age when human dissection was still controversial and legally restricted, Vesalius was a dedicated and enthusiastic body snatcher. He and his students were known to haunt the execution grounds outside of the city walls, stealing the bodies of recently hanged criminals from the gallows under the cover of darkness. On one famous occasion, he stole the bones of a known felon from a gibbet where the body had been left to rot, smuggling them back to his rooms, piece by piece, to assemble a full skeleton. His commitment to empirical observable evidence was absolute. His students go to a very practical education, one that sometimes required a strong stomach, a shovel, and a moonless night. The culmination of his work was his 1543 masterpiece, Domani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body. It was one of the most important books ever published. It was not just a text, but a work of art filled with hundreds of beautiful, breathtakingly detailed woodcut illustrations of the human body, its muscles, bones, and organs, often posed in dramatic classical landscapes. For the first time, a student in London or Paris could see inside the human body with an accuracy that had previously been impossible. It was a revolution in seeing. And this is where historians debate the nature of Vesalius's achievement. Was he a lone singular genius who single-handedly overthrew the tyranny of ancient authority? Or was he the most brilliant product of a broader cultural shift happening in Renaissance Italy, a humanist movement that was already beginning to favor direct observation and experience over blind faith in ancient texts? Like Paracelsus faced a furious backlash from the traditional Galenists who attacked him as an arrogant upstart for daring to question the master. But the work was done. The beautiful, detailed, and accurate maps of the Fabrica could not be unseen. The book of Galen had been proven. The book of the human body was now open for all to read. The very foundation of the old medicine, built on ancient texts and flawed animal analogies, was beginning to crumble. You've now witnessed the 2 great parallel rebellions that signaled the end of an era. Paracelsus had challenged the chemical and philosophical soul of ancient medicine, while Vesalius had challenged its physical body. The weird, wonderful, and disgusting medicine of the Renaissance was slowly, painfully beginning to give way to a new age of science. It is now time to step back one last time and reflect on the stranger legacy of this entire period of medical history. You stand now at the end of this long and strange journey. Having walked through the apothecary shops, the surgical theaters, and the alchemical laboratories of Renaissance Europe, you've seen medicine based on ancient theories, sympathetic magic, and chemical poisons. You've witnessed the 2 great rebellions of Paracelsus and Vesalius, the twin earthquakes that began to shake the foundations of 1,000 years of medical tradition. It is time now, toss it back and ask, what is the legacy of this weird, disgusting, and utterly fascinating era? The answer is as complex and contradictory as the age itself. And it is here that historians of science continue to debate. Should the Renaissance be seen as the finale elaborate chapter of medieval medical dogma with its reliance on humors, astrology, and faith? Or was it the very first chapter of modern scientific inquiry, the moment when the seeds of observation and experimentation were first planted? The truth, you sense, is that it was a messy, chaotic, and absolutely essential bridge between on a practical day-to-day level. For the poor soul suffering from a fever or a broken bone, Renaissance medicine was an unmitigated disaster. The theory of the four humors was elegant but wrong. The practice of bloodletting was logical but lethal. The use of pedod skulls and mummies was exotic but useless. The surgeries were courageous, but in anage without sanitation they were often a death sentence. For every one person that Renaissance medicine helped, it likely harmed or even killed many more. And yet hidden within this vast landscape of failure were tiny accidental successes. This is a quirky and fascinating tidbit of medical history. Many of the herbal remedies prescribed the apothecaries and physicians for the wrong humoral reasons actually contained powerful chemically active compounds that worked. When a doctor prescribed willow bark tea for a fever because it was a cooling plant, he was inadvertently giving his patient salicin, the active compound that would later be synthesized to make aspirin. When he prescribed foxglove for dropsy or fluid retention, he was unknowingly administering digitalis, a potent cardiac medication still in use today. The Renaissance physician was stumbling in the dark, but every now and then, he would accidentally trip over a genuine cure. It's like trying to fix a complex machine by randomly pouring different potions into it, and once in a while, one of them actually works. But the true lasting legacy of Renaissance medicine was not in its cures, but in its questions. It was theory that began to challenge the unquestionable. This is the mainstream historical view of the period's importance. It was a critical transitional age that paved the way for the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Paracelsus in all his arrogant drunken glory asked a revolutionary question. What if disease is a chemical problem, not a humoral one? In doing so, he opened the door for the development of pharmacology research for specific chemical cures for specific diseases. He may have used toxic metals and mystical theories, but the question he asked was the right one. The Renaissance had to ask all the wrong questions in a very loud and confident voice so that future generations could finally start asking the right ones, and Andreas Vellius with his scalpel and his quiet determination asked the most important question of all. What if we trust our own eyes more than the ancient books? By choosing the evidence of the human body over the authority of Galen, he established the principle of direct observation that is the bedrock of all modern science. The great medical discoveries that followed William Harvey's discovery of the circulation of the blood, for example, would have been impossible without the accurating amical maps that Vesalius provided. So you see the legacy clearly now. It is the legacy of failure that created the conditions for success. The world of Renaissance medicine had toed so spectacularly and variously wrong in order to force the emergence of something new. Its reliance on ancient texts forced rebels to turn to observation. Its brutal surgeries highlighted the desperate need for anesthesia and sanitation. Its mystical potions paved the way for experimental chemistry. It was a world of medicine based on logic without fact, faith without proof, and tradition without question. But it was also the world where for the first time in a millennium, people began to believe that the intricate, beautiful, and fragile human body was not just a house for a soul or a vessel of humans, but something that could be mapped, studied, understood, and perhaps in day truly healed. And so our stranger through the world of Renaissance medicine draws to a quiet close. The story is told. The bizarre and often frightening images of this past age can now begin to soften and dissolve. Let the acrid smell of the alchemist laboratory fade from your senses. Let the unsettling sight of the surgeon's gleaming tools recede into the darkness. The frenzied boasting of the mountebank and the solemn murmur of the hospital ward all melt away, leaving only a deep and profound silence. This was a journey into a world of profound suffering, but also one of profound searching. It was an age of great minds trying to solve the puzzle of human sickness with the wrong set of clues. You've been a witness to their strange and somewhat mystifying attempts, all from the deep comfort and safety of your own bed. History is over now, and you can release its weight. The world of bloodletting and powdered mummies is a distant historical curiosity, a dream from which you're now beginning to wake. There are no more lessons to be learned tonight, no more bizarre concoctions to contemplate. There is only the gentle rhythmic cadence of your own breathing, a soft and steady anchor in the peaceful darkness of your room. Feel the warmth and comfort of your blankets and the stillness of the air around you. The past is a closed book. Let your mind drift away from its strange and complex pages and float gently now into a serene and untroubled sleep. Thank you for watching this video.